Big Shaq was minding his own business when a wealthy woman sneered, "Go back to Africa." The cafe went silent. People stared. Cameras rolled. But instead of arguing, Shaq smiled, because he had a plan. What he did next shocked the world, destroyed her life, and turned hate into something unforgettable. Stay till the end, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The air inside Rutherford's cafe carried the scent of freshly brewed espresso and warm pastries, a stark contrast to the crisp autumn breeze outside. Nestled in the heart of an exclusive shopping district, the cafe was a haven for the wealthy elite, where chandeliers cast a golden glow over the marble countertops and the sound of clinking silverware blended with quiet conversations. It was the kind of place where luxury wasn't just an experience, it was an expectation. Shaquille O'Neal stepped inside, his towering frame instantly commanding attention. Dressed casually in a designer hoodie, fitted jeans, and limited edition sneakers, he was effortlessly cool, yet completely unbothered by the eyes on him. He wasn't there to make a statement, he just wanted a cup of coffee. Despite his status as an NBA legend and businessman, today he was just another customer. He placed his order, ignoring the whispers around him, and took a seat by the window, scrolling through his phone. At a nearby table, Victoria Langley swirled the wine in her crystal glass, her manicured fingers adorned with rings that glittered under the cafe's soft lighting. Dressed in an elegant Chanel dress and a perfectly arranged pearl necklace, she was the picture of wealth and entitlement. She leaned toward her two friends, Charlotte and Lauren, her lips curling in distaste as she glanced at Shaq. "This place used to have standards," she muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Now, just anyone can walk in." Charlotte chuckled behind her menu, but Lauren looked uneasy, shifting uncomfortably as her eyes flicked between Shaq and Victoria. Shaq, unaware of the growing tension, continued sipping his coffee, his broad shoulders relaxed. He had been in 1,000 places like this, had heard 1,000 people like Victoria. Normally, he let things slide. But then, Victoria stood, walked straight toward him, and sneered. "Maybe you should go back to Africa where you belong." The cafe fell into stunned silence. The hum of conversation stopped. A waiter, mid-step, hesitated, glancing between them. Customers looked up, some shifting uncomfortably, others watching intently. The tension in the air was suffocating. Shaq set his coffee down, slow and deliberate. He took off his sunglasses, placing them beside his cup. His deep-set eyes met Victoria's with quiet intensity. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Victoria smirked, doubling down. "You heard me." For the first time, something flickered across her face. Hesitation. Shaq studied her for a moment, the weight of history pressing against his chest. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who had been told they didn't belong, every moment of casual racism disguised as civility. He exhaled slowly, not with anger, but with a quiet, simmering disappointment. He wasn't going to let this slide. This wasn't just an insult. This was a lesson waiting to be taught. The moment Victoria Langley's words left her mouth, a thick, suffocating silence gripped the cafe. Every patron, every waiter, and even the barista behind the counter froze. No one could believe what they had just heard. A few people exchanged glances, waiting to see how Shaq would react. But before anyone could say anything, the quiet click of a phone camera broke the silence. A young man sitting at a nearby table, his fingers trembling with disbelief, had recorded the entire exchange. His eyes darted to Shaq, then to Victoria, and finally to his screen. Without hesitation, he uploaded the video to Twitter with the caption, "Rich white woman tells Shaquille O'Neal to go back to Africa. Unbelievable." Within seconds, notifications flooded his phone. People were sharing it, commenting, reacting. The fire had been lit. By the time Shaq left the cafe, the video had already gone viral. Social media exploded with outrage. On Twitter, #Victoria Langley and #Respect Shaq began trending within the hour. The responses came fast and furious. Did she just say that to Shaq? Victoria Langley is done, not her telling one of the greatest athletes ever to go back to Africa. The entitlement is unreal. She picked the wrong one today. Thousands of retweets turned into hundreds of thousands. Celebrities, athletes, and activists all weighed in. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines like Victoria Langley, high society racist, and Shaquille O'Neal faces public discrimination in upscale cafe. Meanwhile, Victoria remained oblivious to the firestorm brewing against her. It wasn't until her phone buzzed repeatedly, calls from her PR agent, friends, and business partners, that she realized something was wrong. She opened her social media and felt her stomach drop. Her name was everywhere, but not in the way she wanted. Panicked, she called her PR agent. "Fix this," she snapped, pacing inside her lavish penthouse. "Tell them it was taken out of context. I wasn't being racist, I was just making a point about—" "Victoria," her agent cut in, voice clipped. "There's no spinning this. The video is clear. You need to apologize." So, in a desperate attempt at damage control, Victoria released a public statement. "I deeply regret any misunderstanding that occurred. My words were taken out of context, and I sincerely apologize if I offended anyone. I am not a racist, and I have always supported diversity and inclusion." The response was immediate and brutal. "If I offended anyone is not an apology. Classic non-apology. Just say you're racist and go." She regrets getting caught, not what she said. Her business partners started distancing themselves. Invitations to elite charity events were quietly rescinded. The brands she collaborated with released statements saying they were reviewing their association with her. Her carefully curated image of a respected socialite was beginning to crumble. Through it all, Shaq remained silent. When reporters caught up with him outside an event later that week, they expected him to be angry, to lash out, to demand retribution. But instead, he shook his head and sighed. "I've dealt with racism my whole life," he said. "This isn't new, but I've got a better way to handle it." The media wanted more, a stronger reaction. But Shaq refused to give them the headline they were looking for. Instead, he had something much bigger planned. Shaq sat in his home office, the soft hum of his computer filling the room. He wasn't one to dwell on negativity, but something about Victoria Langley's entitled arrogance didn't sit right with him. He had encountered racism before, but this wasn't just about him. It was about the deeper issue of people like Victoria thinking they could get away with it. He needed to understand who she was, what drove her, and more importantly, how to turn this situation into something meaningful. His assistant, Derek, a sharp and resourceful man in his mid-30s, leaned against the desk, scrolling through his phone. "Man, this woman is everywhere. She's been in and out of high society events, flaunting wealth like it grows on trees. But—" He hesitated, then smirked. "It looks like the trees ain't growing no more." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Derek turned his phone around, revealing a news article from a high-end financial blog. The headline read, "Victoria Langley's Empire on the Brink of Collapse." Shaq frowned as Derek explained. "She's drowning in debt, Shaq. That mansion she loves to parade around in. About to be foreclosed. Creditors are circling. Turns out, her lavish lifestyle was built on loans, fake partnerships, and a whole lot of smoke and mirrors. She's been keeping up appearances, but the money? Gone." Shaq exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "So she's not as powerful as she wants people to think." "Not even close," Derek said. "Her business ventures failed. The investors pulled out, and now with this racism scandal, she's toxic. Nobody wants to be associated with her." Shaq rubbed his chin, deep in thought. He had assumed she was just another wealthy, entitled socialite who thought her money made her untouchable. But now, knowing she was scrambling to keep up appearances, her arrogance made more sense. She wasn't just racist, she was desperate. Then, an idea formed in Shaq's mind. An idea bigger than just exposing her hypocrisy. "What if," he said slowly, "instead of tearing her down, we make her part of something bigger?" Derek tilted his head. "Bigger how?" Shaq leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a plan. "She wants power, right? Wants to be seen as someone important? What if we give her a way to save face, but on our terms?" Derek smirked. I like where this is going. Shaq continued. We turn her downfall into something positive. Instead of just letting her fade into irrelevance, we push her into the one place she's never wanted to be, on the side of change. But not by choice. We make her contribute to something real. Derek nodded. All right. I see what you're saying. You want to force her into helping the very people she disrespected. Exactly, Shaq said. She thinks she's above everyone else. But now she's in no position to refuse an offer, especially if it means salvaging what's left of her reputation. Derek chuckled. Man, this is some next-level chess move. You're about to turn her biggest humiliation into a lesson she can't escape from. Shaq nodded, the wheels already turning. He wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in impact. Victoria had spent years looking down on people, believing she was better than them. Now, she was about to learn what real power looked like. Not through money or status, but through humility and accountability. And the best part? She wouldn't have a choice. The Grand Langley estate, once the crown jewel of Victoria's lavish lifestyle, now stood as a symbol of her downfall. The towering mansion, with its pristine white pillars and sprawling gardens, had been the site of countless exclusive parties, charity galas, and moments of arrogance where Victoria had looked down on those she deemed beneath her. But today, it was no longer a palace. It was a financial burden she could no longer bear. Inside a high-end real estate auction house in downtown Los Angeles, bidders filled the seats, murmuring in hushed excitement. The foreclosure of such a high-profile property was rare, and real estate moguls, investors, and the curious elite had gathered to witness the spectacle. Victoria, dressed in a black designer coat and oversized sunglasses to hide the bags under her eyes, sat near the front, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. She had spent the past week in a state of desperation, trying every possible avenue to halt the sale of her home. But there were no more favors left to call in. The bank had spoken, her house was up for auction, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The auctioneer took the podium, adjusting his tie. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now opening the bidding for the Langley estate, a one-of-a-kind luxury home in the heart of Beverly Hills. Starting bid, $5 million. The room came alive with raised paddles and escalating numbers. Investors were eager, knowing they could flip the property for even more. Victoria felt sick to her stomach as the bidding climbed past $10 million. Every number called was another nail in the coffin of her former life. Then, a deep, familiar voice rang out. $20 million. Silence fell over the room. Heads turned. Shaquille O'Neal stood near the back, arms crossed, completely at ease. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The murmurs started immediately. Shaq wasn't just here. He was bidding. The auctioneer, clearly shocked, quickly recovered. We have a bid of $20 million. Do I hear 21? The room remained still. Even the wealthiest bidders knew better than to challenge Shaq's deep pockets. A few exchanged looks, but nobody dared to raise their paddle. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer's gavel came down. Sold to Mr. O'Neal. The crowd erupted into whispers, cameras flashing as reporters rushed to capture the moment. Victoria's world spun. This couldn't be happening. She shot to her feet, shoving past people as she stormed toward Shaq. You can't do this, she hissed, her voice cracking. This is my home. Shaq turned to her, his expression unreadable. Not anymore. Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes. She had lost everything. And now, the man she had belittled, the man she had tried to push away with her ignorance, owned the very thing she had clung to as a status symbol. Her voice wavered. I don't have anywhere to go. Shaq reached into his pocket, pulled out a single crisp dollar bill, and held it out to her. You always looked down on me, he said, his tone calm but firm. Now you can say a black man helped you out. The cameras caught everything. The flash of humiliation on Victoria's face. The stunned silence of the crowd. For the first time in her life, Victoria Langley had no words. The Langley estate, once a fortress of exclusivity and privilege, now stood at a crossroads. For decades, it had been a symbol of wealth, arrogance, and a world that shut out those who needed help the most. But under Shaq's ownership, its future was about to take a very different turn. After the auction, the media had a field day with the story. Every news outlet, social media platform, and sports channel covered the shocking twist. How a racist woman had tried to belittle Shaq, only for him to end up owning her house. Memes flooded the internet. Late-night talk shows made jokes about it, and the public demanded to know what Shaq planned to do next. Would he live there? Sell it? Demolish it? But Shaq had a different vision. Instead of turning the mansion into another trophy of wealth, he decided to turn it into something meaningful, something that would make a lasting impact. He wasn't interested in revenge, he wanted change. Standing in front of the grand estate, Shaq made his announcement. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, and the world listened as he said, "This house was a place that shut people out. Now it's going to be a place that welcomes them in." The Langley estate was about to become a community center for underprivileged youth. The transformation started immediately. Construction crews arrived, stripping away the elitist touches that had once defined the mansion. The extravagant ballroom? It was converted into a mentorship and career training hall where young entrepreneurs could learn from successful business leaders. The pristine tennis court? It became an outdoor basketball court, free for all kids who wanted to play. The grand dining room, where Victoria once hosted exclusive parties, was turned into a food bank and outreach center for struggling families. Shaq personally oversaw every change, making sure the space truly served those who needed it. He reached out to local charities, youth programs, and educators to ensure that the center provided real opportunities for people to grow, learn, and build better futures. He even brought in some of his NBA friends to help, organizing basketball clinics and motivational sessions. Kids from neighborhoods where opportunities were scarce now had access to mentors, resources, and hope, things that had once been locked away behind the Langley estate's iron gates. And the best part? The center would be free for all. The news of the transformation went viral. What started as a scandal had now turned into a story of redemption and change. Social media exploded with reactions. Shaq didn't just buy the house, he flipped the entire narrative. This is how you handle racism, not with hate, but with action. Victoria wanted to keep people out. Now her house is a symbol of lifting people up. Celebrities, athletes, and activists applauded Shaq's decision. Donations poured in. Even city officials took notice, pledging to support the initiative. The Langley estate, once a playground for the wealthy, was now a beacon of hope for those who had always been kept out. At the grand opening, hundreds gathered outside, eager to see what had become of the infamous mansion. Families, community leaders, and kids from struggling neighborhoods stood together, waiting for Shaq to cut the ribbon. As he stepped up to the podium, he looked out at the crowd, faces filled with excitement, hope, and anticipation. He took a deep breath and said, "We don't fight hate with hate. We fight it by lifting others up." The crowd erupted in applause. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about proving that change is possible. Victoria Langley had once been the queen of high society. Her name carried weight in elite circles. Her mansion hosted the most extravagant parties, and her wealth shielded her from the realities of the world outside her carefully curated bubble. But now, all of it was gone. After Shaq's purchase of her estate and its transformation into a community center, Victoria's life crumbled faster than she could have ever imagined. The backlash from her racist outburst had turned her into a social pariah. Her so-called friends distanced themselves, brands cut ties, and invitations stopped coming. The country club she once bragged about revoked her membership. The business partners she used to work with no longer returned her calls. She had become a walking scandal, a reminder of everything wrong with the privileged elite who believed their wealth placed them above others. For the first time in her life, Victoria had nowhere to turn. But the worst part? Her own son, Daniel, rejected her. Daniel Langley, 19, had grown up in the same luxury his mother had always flaunted. But unlike her, he had never shared her prejudice. He had spent years watching her look down on people who weren't part of their class. He had heard her passive-aggressive comments about race, her thinly veiled insults toward people she deemed lesser, and the way she treated staff, service workers, and strangers who didn't fit her vision of who belonged. But until now, he had been too afraid to speak up. That changed when Shaq turned their former home into a beacon of opportunity. One day, Daniel drove past the estate, only to see something that shook him. Kids, many from underprivileged backgrounds, running up and down what used to be their private driveway, playing basketball on a court that had once been restricted to only the elite. Families gathering in what had once been a ballroom, now a space for community support. Laughter, joy, and hope radiating from the walls of a place that had once been ruled by exclusion. And there, in the middle of it all, Shaq. Instead of bitterness or revenge, he had built something beautiful from his mother's ignorance. That was when Daniel made his decision. That evening, Victoria sat alone in a small rented apartment, a far cry from her former mansion, when she heard a knock at the door. When she opened it, she was met with the last person she expected, Daniel. With a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he gave her a hard stare. "I'm leaving." Victoria's heart pounded. "What? Where are you going?" He took a deep breath. "To the community center." Her stomach twisted. "That place? After everything that man did to us?" Daniel clenched his jaw. "After what you did, Mom. I'm going to work for Shaq's mentorship program. He's actually helping people. I don't want to be anything like you." The words cut through her like a blade. "Daniel, honey, I know this has been difficult, but you don't have to—" "Don't," he snapped. "Don't try to justify it. You humiliated yourself. You humiliated me. And now, I have to be the one to fix what you broke." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway, shaking. For the first time, Victoria truly felt alone. Weeks later, Victoria sat in her car outside the former Langley estate. She had told herself she wouldn't come back, that she didn't care what had become of the place she once ruled. But she couldn't help it. As she stared through the gates, she barely recognized what had once been her home. The pristine mansion that once symbolized exclusivity had become a place of hope and joy. Children ran across the front lawn, their laughter echoing through the air. Families, once invisible to people like her, now gathered in the very spaces she had once reserved for the elite. And standing in the middle of it all, Daniel. Her son, smiling, shaking hands with Shaq, talking to the kids with excitement in his eyes. Victoria gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. This was her punishment. Not just losing her wealth, her home, or her social standing, but losing the one thing that truly mattered, her son's respect. As the sun set over the community center, Victoria realized something painful. This wasn't just her downfall. This was the moment she realized she'd been wrong all along. The sun shined brightly over what was once Victoria Langley's estate, but now it stood as something far greater, a beacon of hope for an entire community. Where exclusive garden parties were once held, children now ran across the open lawn, laughing. The grand halls, once filled with arrogance and privilege, had been transformed into classrooms, mentorship spaces, and recreation areas for families who had never been welcomed before. It was no longer just a mansion. It was a movement. Shaq had spared no effort in making sure the official opening of the Langley Community Center would be a day to remember. Word had spread far and wide about what he had done, not just purchasing the house of a racist socialite, but transforming it into something meaningful. The story had gone viral, and the world was watching. As the event began, the front gates opened to welcome hundreds of guests, local families, activists, athletes, and even celebrities who had come to support the cause. Kids sprinted to the brand new basketball courts, while others explored the education center, which offered free tutoring, career counseling, and mentorship programs. Reporters lined the edges of the event, capturing every moment. The headlines wrote themselves. Shaq turns hate into hope. Exclusive mansion now a safe space for the community. Big Shaq does it again. This time, it's personal. As Shaq walked through the center, shaking hands and greeting guests, his assistant Derek nudged him. "You see the turnout, man? This is bigger than we ever imagined." Shaq nodded, scanning the crowd. He had played in championship arenas, stood in front of thousands of roaring fans. But this was his greatest victory. As the event reached its peak, a stage had been set up in what was once the Langley estate's lavish backyard. Now, it served as a platform for change. Shaq took the microphone, looking over the crowd of eager faces, some young, some old, all waiting to hear from the man who had turned a hateful moment into a national conversation. He took a deep breath and smiled. "Hate never wins," he said, his deep voice carrying over the crowd. "But kindness? That's how you change the world." A wave of applause erupted. Shaq continued, his tone steady and full of conviction. "When someone tells you that you don't belong, you have two choices. You can let them define you, or you can prove them wrong. You can answer hate with hate, or you can rise above it and create something that lasts." He gestured around the center. "This is what lasts." The audience cheered, and for the first time, Shaq allowed himself to soak in the moment. This wasn't just about proving a point. It was about building a future for the kids who had been told they didn't belong, kids who deserved the same opportunities as anyone else. And standing among the crowd was someone who understood that lesson more than anyone. As Shaq stepped down from the stage, he turned to see Daniel Langley, Victoria's son, walking toward him. Unlike his mother, Daniel looked genuine, nervous even. He had been working at the center since its transformation, but today was different. Daniel hesitated, then extended his hand. Shaq looked at it for a moment, then shook it firmly. "I just wanted to say," Daniel started, his voice low. "You were right." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "About what?" Daniel sighed, glancing around. "About all of it. About what really matters. I spent years thinking privilege meant power, that money made you better than others. But this place, this changes lives. And I want to be a part of it." Shaq studied him for a second, then nodded. "You serious about that?" Daniel met his gaze. "Yeah. I want to make up for what my family stood for. I want to help." Shaq clapped a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Then let's get to work." Nearby, a photographer captured the moment. A young man choosing growth over hatred, stepping out of the shadow of his past. Not far from the celebration, a black sedan was parked just outside the gates. Inside, Victoria Langley sat in the driver's seat, her manicured nails gripping the steering wheel tightly. She hadn't planned on coming, but curiosity had gotten the best of her. From behind the tinted windows, she watched the scene unfold. Her former mansion, now a sanctuary for the very people she once looked down on. She saw Shaq, standing tall, loved, and respected. She saw her son, shaking his hand, choosing a different path. And for the first time, she felt something foreign. Regret. She had lost her home. She had lost her reputation. But worst of all, she had lost Daniel. As the crowd continued celebrating, Victoria put the car in drive and slowly pulled away, leaving behind the life she had once controlled but never truly appreciated. As the sun set over the center, Shaq stood by the basketball court, watching kids shoot hoops, their laughter filling the air. One young boy, no older than 10, ran up to him, holding a ball. "Hey Shaq, you gonna play or just stand there?" Shaq chuckled. "You trying to challenge me, little man?" The boy grinned. "I heard you're kinda slow now." The crowd roared with laughter as Shaq feigned offense. "Oh, you got jokes, huh?" He took off his jacket, dribbled the ball a few times, and stepped onto the court. As the game began, Derek and Alicia watched from the sidelines. Alicia smiled. "You know, for a guy who was publicly insulted, bought a racist woman's house, and turned it into a safe haven for the community, he sure doesn't hold a grudge." Derek smirked. "That's because he doesn't need to. He already won." Shaq dunked over the kid, laughing as he lifted the boy onto his shoulders. The camera panned out, showing the entire center, alive with energy, hope, and a future built on something stronger than hate. As the last bit of sunlight faded, Shaq stood tall, knowing he had turned a negative moment into a legacy that would last for generations. If this story inspired you, don't let it end here. Stand against hate, uplift others, and be the change this world needs. Share this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and let's spread positivity together. And if you want more powerful stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. The fight for a better world starts with us.